Our vehicle now moves virtually at the speed of light, just flies straight down our screen. So that's good. We've got the movement in. Now I just want to highlight some things with coding to make our lives a little bit easier. So, with our player controller script open in our IDE, my IDE does some really useful things to make my life a lot easier. So, one of the big things first is if I start typing a word, say transform, it automatically tries to suggest the word that I'm trying to type, in this case transform, and I can press enter, and it'll complete that word for me. Now, if I type dot or period or full stop, you'll see that my IDE suggests all of these different words. And a lot of these words, especially if they have this little purple icon next to it, these are all actually other methods that I can use, just like our translate method. Now, you might hear people say methods or functions in Unity and in C#. They're essentially the same thing, but a lot of people just tend to call things methods when you're using these kinds of statements here that have parentheses. Now, you can think of all of these different words very similar to how you would think of a dictionary. And so a dictionary helps you understand a word that you're looking for. In this case, in programming, this is called documentation. And so our documentation, or our dictionary, tells us all of the different words, all of the different actions that we can perform with our transform component here. So I'll use translate again. And now, if we push that dictionary analogy even further, so we have the word translate. And if I use an open parentheses, you'll see that now my IDE suggests different parameters, different pieces of information that I can tell it to use to do something. You can think of this very similar to a thesaurus and synonyms, where many different words have a similar meaning. In this case, we have many different kinds of methods, and these methods all have different ways that you can essentially do the same thing. So in this case, it's asking for a vector3 translation. Now, in order to get a vector3, I can actually just type vector3. And here, now, you can actually see we actually have a suggestion as to what a vector3 is, which is super helpful. So my IDE tells me that a vector3 is a representation of 3D vectors and points. What does that mean? Well, in fact, that 0, 0, 1 is just 3 dimensions of points, 3 different points that we use, a 0, and a 1. In fact, that 0, and that 1 all correlate to the position on our transform component. So we have the 0 on the x, the 0 on the y, and then our 1 is actually the z updating over time. We even have these vectors, these 3D points, in our obstacle with our position. You can see the 0, 0, and the 25. That's a vector 3. That's 3 different points that we're storing. So with that information, it's very helpful because we can actually just shorthand this bit of code that we wrote with 0, 0, 1. In fact, if we use dot and then forward, you can see that forward is actually just shorthand for writing 0, 0, 1. So that actually, can save us a lot of time, and especially is very helpful to making our code easier to understand. Because if I told a person to move something 0, 0, 1, they'd be like, I don't know what you're talking about. But if I tell them to move forward, they know the direction of forward. So this is how different keywords in programming can help make our lives easier, to make it easier to understand what is in front of us, but then also translate that into something that the computer can understand, in this case, the 0, 0, 1. So if we remove now our previous line of code, now we'll just make sure that we save. Always make sure you save before you go back into Unity. And now, in our player controller, you can see that our translate method has changed from 0, 0, 1 to this vector3 forward. And when I press play, our vehicle is still flying all the way off the screen. So looks like our code did exactly what we wanted to do before, which is great. And it's easier to read. So what you're going to do in your player controller script, you're going to change your line of code from 0, 0, 1 to vector3 dot forward. Now it's your turn.